Hey, it's your pal Mike Shea from the website Sly Flourish and author of the books The Lazy Dungeon Master and Sly Flourish's Fantastic Locations. I'm going to be hosting a brand new show on the Don't Split the Podcast network called the DM's Deep Dive. Each month, I'll be talking to a member of the D&D community about a particular topic of the game like encounter design, tools for improvisation, and game pacing. You can subscribe to the show through iTunes, on Twitch, or on YouTube. Join me, and we'll all work together to make our games fantastic.
This is Tabletop Babble. I'm James Introcaso. This week on the show, I'm talking with Rudy Basso about the new one-player, one-game master RPG, Cthulhu Confidential from Pelgrane Press. Rudy and I actually played through one of the scenarios included with the game, The Fathomless Sleep. And we recorded the session so you can watch it on our Twitch or YouTube channel. For more information on that, go to our website. You can also listen to audio from that session within this Tabletop Babble feed. Special thanks to Wade Rocket and Pelgrane for letting us play through the game and sending us advanced copies. Let's jump right into the good stuff. Here's my chat with Rudy. Okay, people, I'm here with the one and only Rudy Basso. Rudy Basso, welcome to, I guess, your first Tabletop Babble, right?
That is correct, sir.
Man, it took us this many episodes to get you on. We'll have you on faster next time.
Okay.
Yeah, I love talking with my buddy and co-podcast network owner, Rudy Basso. Rudy, why don't you tell the people out there who you are and what you do?
Hey, as mentioned, you and I run this whole operation together. I also have another 2 podcasts on this network. One is Game O'Clock. I host it with my brother Alex, and it's about video games. We kind of focus on a specific genre and look at it from all the angles with a pal. And then the other one I have is our audio drama, Have Spellbook Will Travel, which is something you and I write together and produce together. And that's really great. And you should listen to that. HaveSpellbook.com.
Yes, and it is super, super fun. I love writing that one with you. It is Rudy's brainchild. I have to say that whenever I can, because I want the people to know about your genius, Rudy. And Rudy is a humble man, so I'm sort of your hype man, I guess. I'll be your hype man,
Thanks,
the Basso
buddy.
hype. So, Rudy, the other thing that you are, in addition to my good friend, is you are a person who enjoys role-playing games, and you are a person who helps me discover role-playing games beyond Dungeons and Dragons. You're in there, you're reading up on stuff, you're always saying like, oh, we should try this, I heard about this, which is great. And one of the systems that you really helped introduce me to is the gumshoe system, right? And
Yes.
we are going to talk today about Cthulhu Confidential. It is a new role-playing game from Pelgrane Press. They're the people who put out the Gumshoe system and all of the many role-playing games attached to it. Cthulhu Confidential is available for pre-order right now, but if you get it, they will send you their unfinished PDF, and you can find 3 playable adventures in that core rulebook PDF, which is great. What's unique about Cthulhu Confidential, it is a 1-player, 1 GM, so just 2 people required. In fact, only 2 people can be involved in playing a Cthulhu Confidential game. Before we jump into Cthulhu Confidential and what we thought of the game, let's let people know, of course, that you can see us playing the game on the Don't Split the Podcast Twitch channel and on YouTube. Head on over to don'tsplitthepodcast.com and you can see us playing the game there. It's about a 4-hour-long clip, and it is a riveting good time. And we also released audio on the Tabletop Babble feed for people to listen to of our actual play. So that is also available for you as well if you want to hear us engage in everything we're about to talk about. But before we get to the Cthulhu Confidentialness of it all, let's talk a little bit about the gumshoeness of it all. Rudy, what do you think makes Gumshoe a unique system for anybody who's never played it?
So Gumshoe's unique in that I would say at least half to probably even more of the half of the game is really about investigating and kind of detectiving. It's a game that doesn't really use a lot of dice because half of the skills in it are automatic successes if your character is familiar with them. So, for example, if my character knows a lot about architecture and we're investigating some sort of church for, who knows, like there was a zombie outbreak nearby or there's some sort of vampire activity. My character, because he's familiar with architecture, I would say to James, okay, well, I want to look at the architecture to see if there are any clues there. And James, as the dungeon master, if it's fitting, has to say, yes, you do notice in the architecture that there is blah, 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 and that will help me learn more about whatever it is I'm searching for. So a lot of the dice randomness is taken out of it in that way. But that's not to say that there is no dice whatsoever. So it's kind of broken down. Like I said, there's two skill systems. There's like sleuthing and fighting. So if the combat does go down, it's like roll to succeed, roll to fail. And it's usually very lethal in these games. There's more looking around and figuring out the clues before actually just throwing down with enemies. Usually, if you do get into a combat, you probably know what's going to happen. And if your players are playing correctly, they'll have lots of different contingencies planned if things go wrong. It's a really great game if you're the kind of player who loves to plan everything out. And that just so happens to be the kind of player I am, which is why I have a special affinity for it.
Yeah, right. It's a great game, not just for mysteries like the title would suggest, right? The gumshoe system. It's also a great game for heists. There are lots of great genres tied to this system, right? I'm sure people have heard of the Dracula Dossier and Night's Black Agents, which is this system applied to super spies fighting vampires, right? There's Trail of Cthulhu, which is, a Cthulhu investigative game, very similar to Cthulhu Confidential, but just for more players. They have a time travel gumshoe game. There's all kinds of great stuff they're doing.
Bubble Gumshoe, I have to mention that.
Oh,
it's
yes, yeah.
really great. Yeah, I ran that. It's like Hardy Boys, Nancy Drew-esque adventurers. So that one has practically no fighting in it. It's all like, it's great. It's a lot of fun. I love it.
Delta Green they're putting out as part of the gumshoe system now, which is like Cthulhu in the jungles of Vietnam. It's crazy. It's like MI6 against Cthulhu. We should shout out Robin D. Laws as the creator of the gumshoe system. You might know him from the Ken and Robin Talk About Stuff podcast. He is just a great game designer, an amazing history buff, really gets into the system, and a lover, I would say, of all things Cthulhu, is probably fair to say, right?
Yeah, well, he is one of the writers on Cthulhu Confidential.
That's right. So this is Robin D. Laws, Chris Spivey, and Ruth Tillman. You may recognize Ruth's name because she was actually on Tabletop Babble, so she is a friend of the show. So why don't we dive in and talk about this? Rudy, I think, when I first heard about this, we were at Gen Con, and we were in a Pelgrane Press panel, and they announced we've got a one-player, one-GM RPG that people can play together. And my first instinct was, that's amazing, because you need less people to play an RPG. And as an adult, I feel like one of the things that holds me back most from playing RPGs is trying to schedule everybody. But then I also had a panic attack because I was like, oh my God, that's so intimate and sounds so scary that it's just like you and your buddy in a room playing a game about Cthulhu. It could be even more intimidating for some people. What was your first reaction when you heard about it?
Very similar, very similar. I've never played a game with less than 4 people, probably, outside of the Dungeon Master. So the idea of just having one other person, that's a lot of onus on the player. You know what I mean? Yeah. And that can be intimidating. And it's a lot of onus on the GM to make sure that you're doing a good job so that the player isn't completely confused. And we'll get into how Cthulhu Confidential deals with that. And works really, really well, I have to say.
Yeah, I have to say too, and we are going to talk a lot about this, and we're also going to talk about one of the adventures in the module, the Fathomless Sleep. But first, we'll talk about the system sort of as a whole, so people can get a taste of that. And then if you want to play the Fathomless Sleep, you'll be able to turn off the podcast from that point on. So why don't we first talk about how the game runs? The game is very similar to the Gumshoe system. Rudy, you described that there are these investigative abilities that just always work, that I feel like is even more important in a one-player game for that to happen, because you don't have a backup plan, right? In a multiplayer game, if somebody overlooks a clue, even if it's not the Gumshoe system, odds are one of the other three players might pick it up. But here, you don't have that happening, and so you don't have a chance of that happening with this system, provided the player is poking around in the way that a detective normally would, or an investigative reporter, or whatever kind of character you choose to play. It's set in the 1930s, 1938 in general, around there, so it's got that real noir feel going on. So I love the way the investigative abilities work here, and then I also love, so in Gumshoe, you have dice pools for your general abilities, which are the abilities that if they fail, they can make the story more interesting, right? You said combat, car chases, so like your driving skills, your abilities to be prepared and that sort of thing. Those abilities, instead of having dice pools that can run out, you just have a certain number of dice that you roll every time there's a test in that skill. And I love that too, because, again, in most Gumshoe games that you're playing with a larger party of people, you're saying to yourself, like, okay, well, if I run out of X skill, I'm sure somebody else will have this covered. But you don't have that option here. So I think the adjustments that they've made on the very basic level for mechanics are really good for one player, one GM. What do you think of those sort of basic adjustments?
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. And they make it very clear that a lot of the tests you'll be having are special. They're called challenges. And actually, we'll get more into this when we talk about the Fathomless Sleep, but your adventure is generally going to be laid out so that the player goes through a series of these challenges that have already been prepared, and you have the outcomes. So if James fails his check, it's not, oh, geez, he failed his check, I got to, figure out some sort of outcome. It's, okay, he failed his check. I have written down what will happen if he fails his check. He succeeded. I know what happens if he succeeds. He succeeded very well. I know what happens if that happens as well. So you're never really in the spot where, oh, geez, he failed. The story stopped and halted. I don't know what to do now. You always have that pre-planned out, which is important, because this is a game it's very difficult to improvise with.
Yeah, I would definitely say that is, I don't know that it's a weakness necessarily of the game, but it is something that is definitely true. These scenarios that are prepared and the scenarios that you would have to come up with are very, very hard to improvise with. And one of the reasons that is there's this other part of the game.
Yes.
Right? That isn't part of most other Gumshoe games that I know of. And that is these cards that you get. That is, I thought was a really fun sort of mechanic within the game, right? So you talked about those tests, those challenges. Here's what happens if you super succeed on something, right? If you gain an advantage is what the lingo of the system.
An
advance, yes, thank you. If you gain an advance, which is the lingo of the system, you gain an edge card. And an edge card is a card that gives you something special. Most of them are sort of one-time use, so you can get a bonus on a future test.
I would say usually it's mechanical, as in +2 to your next roll or something, but sometimes it will be story focused. Like, you help this character, you can now call on him in the future for some help if you need something, or he'll do a particular task for you, which is also very cool, I think.
Yeah, exactly. And there are, similarly, right, there's problem cards. And your problem cards happen when you fail one of those tests, or sometimes you can take an extra problem in order to try to like push yourself to succeed on a test, right? So like if you're trying to, maybe your detective is in a fight and they'll take an extra problem, which is like a twisted ankle that will hurt them later down the line, but wouldn't hurt them as bad as losing the fight outright, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's that cool mechanic. And again, some of the problem cards are not simply mechanical. In fact, you pick a starting problem at the start of each scenario, and that starting problem is just character spice, flavor, that you are meant to roleplay, right? It's not, it doesn't actually have a mechanical necessarily impact on the game.
And I think it's great. I think you played really well. Now, just we'll give an example. Yours was that your character, you could choose that he's like broke. So in the back of your mind, you're thinking, I need to get money. You could think, and this is classic more, that he's lonely. There's a number of female characters that you came across. So perhaps you'll do things that try and win them over. But the one you chose was that you're naturally curious, which is a dream for any GM who's trying to guide someone along a certain path that, oh, good, he'll just call upon this whenever he needs to. The other thing that's really neat about this game is that it's very transparent, which is something you would expect between just two people for an RPG. James, anytime you had to roll for a challenge, you knew exactly what you needed to fail, exactly what you needed to get that success, and exactly what you needed to get that super success. So there's never really any secrets behind what's happening. There's no secret modifiers. There's no secret challenges that he's unaware of. Anytime there was an opportunity or anytime a challenge came up, I said, James, we're doing a challenge. This is the skill that you need to test with. These are what you need to succeed here, here, here.
It's funny. When I was first reading that, I was like, oh man, you see so much of the mechanics of the game. But that actually, I loved that we did that. In practice, it was very cool and it was very exciting because one of the things that you do is you roll your dice one at a time, right? So you could have two, and as you advance your character, quote unquote, level up, if you are lucky enough to survive, you can maybe have two or more dice in some of your skills. So I really, really liked the fact that you roll your dice one at a time because it sort of also helped build up the suspense, which helped build the sort of suspenseful, noir-y, Cthulhu-y atmosphere around us, right? It would be like, oh man, I rolled a 3. Okay, I'm going to need a 4 or better if I want to be able to get a success on this challenge, or if I want to be able to get an advance, So it was very cool to see that. And there's also a mechanic in rolling them one at a time. You get a bonus if you don't use all of your dice to get to where you want to be. And one of the things I love about the rulebook is, we talked about these problems and stuff that people are taking. The rulebook, particularly in the first section, which is meant for both players and GMs, talks a lot about how, you can do things in service of the story, right? You're not necessarily trying to win the day because the game assumes that your character lives to discover the mystery. Now, at the end, when you wrap everything up, if you have enough problem cards, you might die. But because it's one player, right, it's not fun to get killed by a deep one in the middle of the scenario and never know. So you get to, you always play everything out to the end, and as such, it encourages the player to do things sometimes like, hey, maybe you can intentionally say, I'm going to fail this challenge because I am a gambler and I am here in a casino and this is what my problem says and I want to play that, and it's going to be more interesting for me to have whatever complication comes of me having a debt to a mobster who runs the casino, right? Than it is for me to just succeed and be awesome at everything.
Yeah, I mean, there is no health in this game. We didn't mention that earlier, but I think that kind of sums it up immediately. There is no health. And never at any point in any of the challenges that we went through, and I saw all of them because I was running it, there's no you die fail scenario. It's the least adversarial game I've ever played. You know what I mean? Any combat that happened was kind of between the both of us. And It's great. I mean, it's cool not knowing that kind of fear isn't there, and knowing that, hey, I could probably waltz into a mobster's office, have a conversation with him, or try and have a conversation with him, and I won't end up, in an alleyway with my brains blown out, because that's not how this game works.
And I think, again, the rulebook does a good job of explaining that to people, which I really, really liked. And I loved that the rulebook says, it gives this sheet for new players, players who are new, and called How to Solve a Case, which is great because it says, like, you gotta go talk to people, and you've gotta go talk to the scary people.
I loved that. I thought that was so great, because I can see if you're going in with a kind of a traditional mindset, and the GM lays out all these terrible mobster characters, you probably don't want to go walk into their lairs, as it were. You'd think, okay, maybe at the very end I'll go in there with a machine gun, but I don't want to go talk to that guy. He's the bad guy. But no, you can't think of it that way. This is a different kind of game, and I love it for that.
I love what you said about, sort of an adversarial relationship, because when I think of RPGs, I think of them as storytelling games, right? I don't think of them as adversarial, but I think on a subconscious level, because there's combat and it's like, well, I'm controlling these monsters or bad guys or whatever who are trying to win, and they're trying to do that by killing you, the PCs. There is just some natural inherent in the game, right? Even if you have like the most open group of players, the most collaborative group of players, there's usually some element of that. And this really did not feel that way at all. And I think it can't for a one GM RPG, because that could turn nasty, with the wrong combination of people. I feel like whenever you play an RPG, there's always somebody who's like, well, I'm going to hang back because I don't want to die, because I don't want to, and I put a lot of work into this character, and this totally says, go see the bad guy. You have to solve the case. But guess what? You will be rewarded for your work with an awesome end to your story. You might die, right? Mm. But you're still going to get that, like the hero gets to die, because they were exposed to the color from outer space, not because, a mobster stabbed them.
Not because you rolled a 2, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, and even the failures, like those problem cards were really cool and really interesting. When we were playing, I got some gambling debts, and through getting those gambling debts, like, my character was forced to do some things that maybe he would not have done normally, right? Just like you would in real life if you had some gambling debts.
Yeah, you make a deal with the wrong person, right?
Exactly. Rudy, let's talk a little bit about character creation, which is that there isn't really character creation at all in this. They give you 3 pre-gens, and they talk about how you could tweak them to make your own character, but there's no, like, you have X number of points to spend on these abilities and that sort of thing. It just is, hey, you'll probably want to use one of these pre-gens, right?
Yeah, well, the stories are very much catered to a specific type of investigator, and I'm trying to think, maybe you could run some of the other characters in the one we did, but some of them are very specific to the 3 pre-gens that they give you. So it's easier to craft an adventure for this game, and we can definitely talk about that in a little bit, if you know the character that you're playing it for intimately, like really well, and if you know the location that character lives in as well. Yeah, there is no character building, and that's maybe fine. It helps also, I would say, with the tell a great story aspect, if there's that kind of distance from the player, from their character. I think that they're more willing to take a risk if they didn't put a lot of time into making a backstory that's too deep. Or, making a character can be a time-consuming process. If it takes me an hour so that I have all the skills as perfect as I want, then I'm going to be pretty upset when I know he's going to die at the end or whatever. You know what I mean?
And they provide characters then, in addition to a character sheet with stats, they give these characters, these 3 pre-gens have pretty rich backstories on their own, which does feel like it's required for a one-player, one-GM game.
And in addition, they all have sources, friends. So if it gets to the point now, James, you played Dex Raymond, who's kind of this classic noir private investigator. Your character had no occult background. So when it came up to trying to learn things about the mythos or the particular kind of supernatural elements in this particular adventure, you didn't know what to do. So the game generously provided you with a number of different possible people you can go to. And that's a big part of the gumshoe system as well, is that your entire party should have every investigative skill covered. But because there is no party, you have these alternative people that you can go to. And it's great.
Yeah, and it's funny, we were a little short on time, and I ended up getting an earbud jammed in my ear. Long story.
That happens. Yeah.
Yeah. I had to get my wife to remove it later that night. I couldn't remove it on my own. But enough about that, because that's gross. One of the things that I think is really cool is that you can then go visit those people if you maybe want to create some more scenes. Like, yeah, it's great to bounce theories around, but if you're too steeped in the horror, right? If it's becoming too real, too intimate, whatever, you can be like, okay, I'm just going to go shoot the breeze with my buddy over here. I'm going to try to get rid of some of these problem cards by, taking some extra jobs or healing up a little bit or whatever it is. And I'm going to spend time with my friend and I'm going to kick some cases around. I'm going to kick the tires of this case with my scientist friend over a couple beers or something like that. And you get to role play that scene, which is great.
Yeah, so we talked about this earlier. When it's just one-on-one, a lot of the onus falls on the player. So to be able to take a break, step back, and have someone that their character has a pre-established relationship with who is being run by the GM is really helpful. And in fact, and this is, something I wanted to talk about, the way that the theme is fitting with the mechanics so much is that a lot of the problem cards require you to get rid of them. You are required to take time off from the case and go do something else. Like, for example, at one point, and someone who's tailing you might bash in your headlight of your car. So you have to visit your friend who's a mechanic. And so he's going to ask you, what happened to your car? And then you'll be able to tell him. And the GM and the player can have a conversation. And the GM can suddenly hint, oh, well, maybe you can do this. Maybe you can do that. There's a lot of ways for them to lead the player on subtly without, like, blurting out in their face, this is what you need to do. And it's great because, it can be kind of stressful as the player. I would assume, James, I'll have to turn it to you because you are getting a lot of leads at once. There were several times where you're like, oh man, well, I guess I can go to this guy or this guy or this guy. And knowing the adventure, like there are guys who have nothing to do with the solution. They are straight there to be red herrings, which is classic noir. But it definitely helps sometimes to like take that time off and talk to someone who is not involved with what's going on right now, just to have someone to bounce ideas off of.
That's a great way to get hints, which is super helpful. And it's also a great way when you have a bunch of leads, like you just mentioned, going to see Dex's contact, Madame Ava, sort of helped me narrow down some of the leads, right? In the initial scene, this very classic noir, lady walks into the detective's office and spills a lot of information, right? But it was all, she didn't have all of the specifics. She just knew sort of a lot of the players involved. And so it was one way for me to start narrowing some things down and saying, okay, look, where is this going and where do we want to go? And it's, I was playing Dex as a bit of a skeptic, right? But I also didn't want to get into a place where Dex was so skeptical I couldn't pursue the Cthulhu mythos pieces of this, because the game is called Cthulhu Confidential, and it would be pretty boring if Dex didn't go after the bigger mysteries. And so I played into that aspect of like, well, he's curious, so even if he doesn't believe this, he's going to go along because it might get him to what the real answer is. I love that. I love this aspect of the extra people around. One of the things I want to get into, Rudy, about this, and you and I talked about it a little bit before the podcast, this is a hard game to improv, and it is a big-time deal of prep, particularly on the side of the GM, right?
Yes. I am a huge fan of Mr. Mike Shea's The Lazy DM, and I would say almost nothing in that book is really applicable with this adventure, because you can't be lazy if you're going to run the adventure. You need to know it in and out, beginning to end. You need to have all of your characters down. I wish I had done more prep. This is a true game for performers, too, I would say. If you're a GM, you're going to have so many characters that you can do so many interesting things with. So I will say this. The game has a ton of information if you want to write your own adventure. There's a whole section. In fact, I would say, I don't even know, maybe 30 pages? No.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, there's a lot of advice.
It's a lot.
On it. And it's
a lot of advice. It's great advice. There's a ton of stuff on how to structure your story, how to build your relationship web with all your characters, how to build your kind of timeline for how things should go and how things have progressed to get to the point of the story. There's maybe 15 example challenges that you can use in your game, and specific instructions on what makes a good advance, what makes a good hold, and what makes a good setback. It's very in-depth, but at the same time, you are going to have to be writing a mystery, essentially, if you want to write your own adventure for this game.
Which is not an easy thing to do.
No,
right?
You're going to have to write a short story, essentially.
Yeah. So you're going to have to write the story. Like you said, you're going to have to create all of your cards to give people. Sure. And again, they have a whole big section of sort of generic problems and challenges and cards that you can give out, so that if you do want to write your own, you have some things that you can use, or you can at least base some of your challenges off. But it's going to be a lot of work prepping for this thing, which to me is a little bit of a bummer, because it should be, as a two-player experience, you would hope that it would be the ultimate pick up and play, right?
Yeah, I would agree. I think it would be near impossible to pick up the book and be like, I'm just going to start by writing my own adventure. I think you absolutely have to do one of the stories that comes with the game before you could even, and probably you should do 2 or 3 even, I don't know, before trying to take that on.
But that is the good news, right? Is that it does come with 3 really, really good, I think, well-written, interesting, and flavorful scenarios. And if you did pre-order it, you also get an extra Dex Raymond adventure.
Which is long. I think even longer than the one we ran.
Yeah, it involves a big-time creepy house. Which I don't think is too much of a spoiler, since the adventure is called The House Up in the Hills. Yeah.
I did want to also mention that there's a ton of research on the locations as well. So that helps a lot too, because there are 3. I think it's New York, LA, and Chicago.
New York, LA, and the great city of Washington, D.C.
New York, LA, and D.C. And there's a lot of information on the real life historical figures that were around. Like James ran into Bugsy Siegel, the famous gangster, Mickey Cohen, another gangster. There's all this information about these characters. Literally, it breaks it down to like the streets, the classic streets of these cities.
Yeah.
So they give you as much resources as they possibly can. So that is absolutely appreciated. If you want to run your own adventure, all you need is your story. They can help you with everything else.
Yeah, exactly. You've already got the location info, a lot of the characters, a lot of the also the fictional, sources and stuff who interact with the main character. So all of that is Really, really good to have. Really appreciated, a lot of scenarios, a lot of good examples within there. I do wish, like, part of me is like, I just wish it was easy to pick up and play just because of the two-player nature, right? It seems like it's the perfect game for when your group can't meet that night, but one person can, and you can, say like, well, we've got this. But the good news is only one person needs to have done that prep.
It's true.
So if you go through and read the adventures, the person you're playing with doesn't really need to know anything at all beyond what's on their character sheet. And they're fun to read. Like
I was going to say, I just wanted to reiterate, you said they're well written. I was having a blast reading it, and I was like so hopeful that certain things would happen. And in fact, one thing that I truly didn't think would happen absolutely did, and I was stoked to be able to play this particular moment out.
Oh, really?
I could not see you doing this particular thing, but you 100% zeroed in on it and did it. And I was thrilled to be able to play it out.
Awesome. Well, let's say right now, and then we'll get into the Fathomless Sleep a little bit. Is this something that you recommend to people? Let's on the Pelgrane Press website right now. This is $44.95 for the game. Includes hard copy cover and PDF. And if you did order early, you get that extra Dex Raymond adventure, The House Up in the Hills, which is, I think, a really, really good adventure and super creepy and Cthulhu-y. Is this a recommended buy from Rudy Basso?
Yeah, I just, I've always been a huge fan of, like, adventure games, like LucasArts, Curse of Monkey Island, all those. And this is probably the closest I will ever get to having like a live adventure game with another person. So I absolutely recommend it. I think it'd be a really great like play with your SO game too. Because it does kind of like have that intimate feel, and it's super fun to be able to make something together. And afterwards, you can have like an awesome conversation about, oh, well, you could have done this, you could have done this. So I'd really recommend it. If you have a gamer girlfriend or gamer boyfriend and you're looking for something that just the two of you want to do.
Yeah, I think it is awesome for that, and I'm actually hoping that for that reason, maybe they bring the Gumshoe one-to-one treatment to some other games too, because those of us with SOs who do not enjoy ghouls eating people may enjoy punching vampires in the face instead. So Night's Black Agents one-to-one, looking at you. It's your move, Ken Hite. All right, Rudy, I also would agree. I recommend this, particularly if you like mysteries, if you like Cthulhu, if you like this period of history. I think these are really, really well written things. It's just something great to have on your shelf and read. It'll give you a lot of good ideas, too, about things you could even bring into your own game. This card system could be a really fun thing to hack some other games with and bring it in. So this also gets my seal of approval. It is a recommended buy from me as well. We are going to talk briefly about the Fathomless Sleep. But before we do, here is a word from me about our sponsor this week. Hey everybody, James Introcaso here. Just wanted to let you know that today's episode of Tabletop Babble is brought to you by Audible.com. For you, the listeners of Tabletop Babble, Audible is offering a free audiobook download with a free 30-day trial to give you the opportunity to check out their service. I recommend that you would love to listen to Of Dice and Men. Of Dice and Men is a wonderful book. It is the story of Dungeons and Dragons and the people who play it by David M. Ewalt. It is an awesome book, and it is read by the author, which means it sounds great. Go over to download your free copy of Dice and Men, or whatever audiobook you choose, at audibletrial.com/DSPN. Again, that's audibletrial.com/DSPN. All right, let's get back to our lovely review of Cthulhu Confidential. Okay, Rudy, The Fathomless Sleep.
Yes.
We are going to be full-on spoilery here, so this is your warning now. If you don't want to know, go ahead and turn it off. But let's talk about it. What's The Fathomless Sleep about?
So you are Dex Raymond, as mentioned, classic noir private investigator. A lady comes into your office. She needs help. Her sister, something has happened to her sister. Sister went missing 6 weeks ago, reappeared 4 weeks ago, and has been just catatonic since. Obviously, something's wrong with her. She's been traumatized in some way, and the character wants you to figure out what happened, Dex Raymond, and she hires you to figure it out. So I will say that the occult aspect of this is very subtle. You're not running into deep ones. You're not running into fish people or anything like that. The kind of supernatural elements don't physically appear until the very end of the adventure. Mm-hmm. You kind of get hints here and there. You can kind of have to look into yourself when you're confronted with certain aspects, but it's very light on like monster fighting, I guess we'll say, which is good because you shouldn't be able to fight monsters if you're playing a Cthulhu game.
Even though it is a one player, and even though you know you're surviving until the end of the scenario, there is like a big emphasis on your character's mortality, and the fact that they are not a superhero or a medieval adventurer wizard. And this particular scenario, I loved that you didn't really get into the supernatural until the end. I thought it was a great introduction to that. And again, a great way to play if you want a character who is more of a skeptic, like many investigators are. Mm-hmm. It was a great way to play that because you had all of these real life things to investigate that slowly led you into the end scenario. And so, right, you're looking for this woman's sister. It's all tied up with the mob and gambling.
Yeah. A lot of the major players are gangsters or gangster wannabes. So most of the people you're running into have some sort of underworld connection. So
Sure. Or, are reflective of the time. It's 1938. War's happening. World War II, right? But it's not quite full blown yet. America's not involved. So you're hearing about Nazis and you're hearing about communism and you're
Yeah. In fact, you actually run into a Nazi, James. You never really uncovered this, but the character that was tailing you, the German, he was Nazi working directly for Goebbels, who's the Minister of Propaganda. You could have figured that out. So, yeah, there's this Nazi element. There's this there's McCarthyism kind of bits to it because you meet the screenwriter who's like a member of the Communist Party. If you've seen the newest Coen Brothers movie, Hail Caesar, there's a scene in this that's almost lifted exactly from that movie with all the communists. It's great. It's a really great way to set the tone of the times and a great introduction adventure for anyone playing this game.
It was also fun. There were scenes where like you were playing these characters who were chewing the scenery pretty good, which I think was a lot of fun to get into and fun for me to interact with them. You could definitely play Dex Raymond as like a Dick Tracy style character if you wanted to, or he could be more of like a hardened, grizzled kind of.
Yeah.
You can turn up the dials where you want to at certain places in this adventure.
There's an opportunity where a character literally asked you to kill someone else for money. And if you have that broke problem that we mentioned earlier, maybe you want Dex Raymond to kill someone for money.
Exactly. Yeah, and then how is that going to play out? And the problems you encounter, right, can really change the course of what's going on. I sold out a communist screenwriter because I had gambling debts at one point, which was really fun to do because I was like, oh, this is not a thing I saw Dex Raymond. I thought the Dex Raymond I was playing would be above that, but then he got desperate. Let's talk a little bit, Rudy. You said earlier that there was something you didn't think I would do that I did. May I ask what that was?
Yeah, you brought the occultist lady to the catatonic woman. I thought it would take to even get an to be able to see the sister, you had to do something earlier, which was a push on reassurance, I think.
Oh, yeah.
Which you did, yes. And then to also get, there were several obstacles that you would have to go through. I thought, at least, maybe I'm misreading it, but the way I read it, I thought, geez, this will probably be hard to work out. But it happened, and so maybe I was leading you there. I realize now that maybe I I might have pushed you a little bit in that direction.
Well, I definitely feel like I naturally arrived at that conclusion. So that's really interesting. I had no idea, honestly, what you were going to say. And yeah, that turned out to be an amazing scene because of that, right? Because that lady had been there, and there was this weird occult connection that made the cultist woman try to then kill herself, and I had to stop her, and it really turned into a bonkers, amazing scene. So yeah, I recommend The Fathomless Sleep. I think it's a great one to start out with. The other two are also really good. They deal a little bit more with particular issues that minorities, particularly in the 1930s, were dealing with. So Vivian Sinclair is an investigative journalist who has a scenario that takes place in New York. And she occasionally has to deal with the sexism of the time, right? And then the DC is called Capital Color, and you are playing a private eye named Langston Montgomery Wright, who has to deal with, sort of being a man of color in the 1930s in Washington, D.C. So they run into some other problems just because of who they are, which could be a little more difficult to roleplay your first time through.
And I really have to give it to Pelgrane. I think that's a very brave and very awesome choice that they've made to include these minority characters, as outside of Dex, obviously, as two of the three pre-gens that are there. Yeah. So kudos to them. Very cool of them.
Yeah, very, very cool. And Vivian is bisexual, which was like, holy crap, you're a bisexual woman in the night. Like, yeah. I can't even begin to relate, but her scenario is so awesome, right? And it's like, this is something...
There's a whole section about how if you want to play Dex Raymond as gay, and there are opportunities for the screenwriter character who you didn't interact with. Like, if Dex were to flirt with you, then you should flirt back. This character would be open to doing something like that. So... it's great. It's really cool that they've decided to do things like this.
That is awesome. Yeah, it's really, really cool. And I think, like I said, just well written, great scenarios. The biggest drawback I think this has is the amount of prep time required. Even if you're running a published adventure, you really need to know that published adventure inside out. And if you're going to try to write your own, make sure you've got plenty of time set aside. And when you sit down to play this, also make sure you've got time set aside or another time you're going to meet up, because you might be a slow investigator like me and go every place you can before you reach the end.
I don't know. I think you were pretty quick, to be honest. I think we finished in about 3.5 to 4 hours. It could have gone longer.
Yeah, definitely. And I think I would, had we not been pressed for time, I was having a good enough time that I would have loved to explore some more leads and that sort of thing. So I really recommend it. Rudy, you recommend it as well. Where can people find you, Rudy?
You can follow me on Twitter at Rudy Basso. You could also, of course, go to don'tsplitthepodcastnetwork.com to see all the other wonderful podcasts that I'm on. Thanks so much for listening.
Thank you so much for coming here on Tabletop Babble today.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's a delight.
Man, that was great. So many thanks to Rudy Basso for joining me here on Tabletop Babble. You know, this is still a new podcast, and the best way to help it grow is to help others find it by leaving us a 5-star review or liking us on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, whatever your pod-catching platform of choice is. To encourage you to do just that, I'm reading one new 5-star review verbatim each episode and crediting the person who left it. Make me say anything you want. Today's 5-star review comes from iTunes. Listener Malice92 writes, "I heart this podcast. It's often hard to collect all the latest info on the state of the game and the many options that are out there. James and the cast at TTB does a great job of getting you the info you need to keep up to date with the state of the game. 5e News from WotC's Mike Merles and the gang at Cobalt Press. I couldn't think of two better interviews to kick off the new podcast. Keep them coming, guys. Well, Malice92, thank you so much for your 5-star review. People, help others find us. Go leave us a great review. And if you want to support the show financially, there's an easy way to do that, and it doesn't cost you anything extra. Before you shop on Amazon or DriveThruRPG, go to our website, don'tsplitthepodcastnetwork.com, and click on the banners on the left. Heck, bookmark them once you get there to make it easy on yourself. Then, just shop as you normally would. It costs you nothing extra and throws a few pennies on the dollar our way. Okay, people, you can find out about everything I do on Twitter at James Introcaso. That's at JamesIntrocaso. And on my website, worldbuilderblog.me. Tabletop Babble is a show on the Don't Split the Podcast Network. Special thanks to Rudy Basso for founding it with me. Our theme music, which you're listening to right now, was provided by Battle Bards. Until next time, remember that RPGs are like sex. If everyone's having fun, you're doing it right.